I fell for her instantly, and the alien woman sensed my desire. First contact, the air on Lumaria felt different, thicker, sweeter, alive with particles that Julian Mitchell had never encountered on Earth. Through his breathing mask, he analyzed the composition while his eyes took in the vista before him. Rolling hills covered in vegetation that pulsed with internal light, creating patterns like heartbeats across the landscape. "Beautiful, isn't it?" came a melodious voice from behind him. Julian turned and for a moment forgot the scientific wonder surrounding him. The Lumarian standing before him had skin the color of twilight, a rich purple that seemed to shimmer with subtle iridescence. Her eyes, large and expressive, contained flecks of silver that caught the light of the twin suns overhead. "I'm Nyara," she said, extending her hand in the human greeting she'd obviously studied. "I've been assigned as your guide and research partner during your stay." Julian took her hand, noting its warmth and the subtle texture that reminded him of velvet. "Julian Mitchell, xenobotanist from Earth's Interstellar Science Division." His voice sounded unnaturally stiff to his own ears, and he cleared his throat. "Thank you for volunteering." Nyara smiled, revealing teeth that were pearlescent against her violet skin. "Not volunteering. I requested this assignment. Your research proposal was intriguing." As they walked toward the research station, Julian found himself stealing glances at his new companion. Her movements were fluid, almost dance-like, and there was something in the way she occasionally tilted her head that suggested she was perceiving more than just the physical world around them. "Our plants communicate," Nyara explained as they entered a grove where flowers unfurled at their approach. "Not with words, but with energy patterns. That's what you're here to study, yes?" Julian nodded, fighting to keep his focus professional. "The bioluminescent properties and possible sentience indicators. But I didn't expect—" He gestured to the flowers that seemed to be following Nyara's movements. "They sense emotions," she said simply. "They're responding to me, but also to you." She glanced at him with a knowing look. "Your curiosity is very bright." Over the next week, Julian and Nyara established a routine. Mornings spent collecting samples, afternoons analyzing data, evenings discussing their findings over meals of Lumarian cuisine that Julian was gradually developing a taste for. Throughout it all, he found himself increasingly drawn to Nyara's perspective, the way she approached science not as a detached observer, but as an active participant in the natural world. "You humans," she remarked one evening as they sat beneath a canopy of glowing fronds, "you separate yourselves from what you study. We believe understanding comes from connection." Julian watched as she placed her hand on a nearby plant, which immediately brightened in response. "Is that how you understand me?" he asked, suddenly self-conscious. Nyara's gaze met his, those silvery flecks in her eyes seeming to intensify. "I sense your emotions, yes. It's part of who we are." A small smile played at her lips. "You're not as difficult to read as you might think." Heat crept up Julian's neck. "And what am I feeling right now?" Instead of answering, Nyara moved closer, her shoulder brushing against his. "The plants around us are glowing brighter," she observed. "They respond to emotional energy, particularly—" She hesitated. "Attraction." The word hung between them, honest and unavoidable. Julian found himself leaning slightly toward her, drawn by something he couldn't quite explain, something both foreign and achingly familiar. "Tomorrow," Nyara said softly, "I'll take you to the Echo Caverns. The botanical specimens there are unlike anything you've cataloged so far." She stood in one graceful motion. "Rest well, Julian of Earth." As she walked away, Julian noticed that the plants around him continued to pulse with light, matching the quickened rhythm of his heart. He was a scientist, trained to observe objectively, but for the first time in his career, he found himself becoming part of his own research, connected to this world and the captivating woman who was showing it to him in ways he had never anticipated. Cultural exchange, the Echo Caverns lived up to their name. Julian's soft exclamations of wonder bounced back to him in whispers as he and Nyara ventured deeper into the crystalline formation. The ceiling arched high above them, studded with bioluminescent fungi that cast a dreamy blue glow over everything below. "These formations took millennia to develop," Nyara explained, her voice melodious in the acoustic perfection of the cave. "The crystals absorb energy during daylight and release it slowly through the night cycle. Julian carefully extracted a sample from a cluster of pulsing violet flora that grew along the cave walls. "On Earth we have nothing like this," he murmured. "Plants that respond to emotional stimuli rather than just light or water. It challenges everything we understand about botanical evolution." Nyara watched him work, her silver-flecked eyes reflecting the ambient glow. "Perhaps your scientists are looking for the wrong signs of intelligence," she suggested. "Not all consciousness expresses itself through movement or sound." When Julian looked up from his work, he found Nyara studying him with an intensity that made his pulse quicken. "What?" he asked, suddenly self-conscious. "I'm curious about your world," she said simply. "Tell me about Earth while you work." As Julian carefully collected his specimens, he found himself painting pictures with words, describing the Pacific Ocean at sunset, the forests of the Pacific Northwest where he'd grown up, the bustling energy of New Singapore where he'd studied. Nyara listened with rapt attention, occasionally asking questions that revealed her keen interest not just in Earth's ecosystems, but in its cultures and connections. "And what about human bonds?" she asked as they settled on a natural stone shelf for a rest. "Your people form partnerships, yes?" Julian nodded, suddenly aware of how close they were sitting. "We do. Some temporary, some lasting lifetimes. Based on what?" Nyara's question was direct, genuine curiosity in her expression. "Compatibility," Julian began, then hesitated. "Attraction, shared goals or values, sometimes just a feeling that's hard to explain." He met her gaze. "How do Lumarians choose their partners?" A small smile played across Nyara's lips. "We sense resonance between spirits. When two Lumarians have complementary emotional patterns, they often form deep bonds." Her voice softened, "though some of us find ourselves drawn to energies quite different from our own." That evening, back at the research station, Nyara invited Julian to share a traditional Lumarian meal. She had decorated the common area with bioluminescent flowers arranged in patterns that shifted with the ambient energy in the room. The effect was mesmerizing. "These respond to our combined presence," she explained, noticing his fascination. "The patterns are unique." As they shared dishes of spiced fruits and proteins unfamiliar to Julian's palate, Nyara taught him phrases in her native language, melodic combinations of sounds that Julian struggled to reproduce, much to her amusement. "Your attempt at our greeting phrase means something quite different," she laughed. "A sound like wind chimes that made the flowers around them pulse brighter." "What did I say?" Julian asked, enjoying the way her face lit up when she smiled. "You essentially told me that my presence makes the stars jealous," she replied, her violet skin darkening slightly at her cheeks. A Lumarian blush, Julian realized. "Well," he said softly, "that might not be incorrect." Their eyes met across the table, and for a moment neither spoke. The flowers around them intensified their glow, creating a cocoon of light that seemed to separate them from the rest of the universe. Later, as Julian walked Nyara to her quarters, their hands brushed, accidentally at first, then with deliberate softness as their fingers tentatively intertwined. The contact sent a pleasant warmth up Julian's arm and into his chest. "The flora respond strongly to us," Nyara observed as the corridor plants brightened in their wake. "Is it just the plants responding?" Julian asked quietly. Nyara stopped at her door, turning to face him fully. "No," she answered with characteristic directness. "It's not just the plants." Her hand rose to lightly touch his cheek. "Your emotions are beautiful, Julian of Earth, bright and honest. They call to me in ways I didn't anticipate." Before he could respond, she leaned forward and pressed her lips gently against his, a human gesture she had clearly learned, but made entirely her own. The touch was brief, but left Julian feeling as though a current had passed between them, awakening something new and exhilarating in his spirit. "Sleep well," she whispered, slipping through her door and leaving Julian standing in a corridor of wildly pulsing light, his heart matching their rhythm. The empathic bond. The third week of Julian's expedition brought them to Lumaria's floating meadows, massive platforms of vegetation that hovered meters above the ground, suspended by gases trapped in their root systems. It was here, reaching for a specimen that grew on the underside of one such formation, that Julian's safety harness failed. The fall was mercifully short but violent enough to snap his left forearm and leave a deep gash across his shoulder. Pain blossomed instantly, white-hot and disorienting. "Julian!" Nyara's voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere as his vision swam. Then she was beside him, her violet face tight with concern. "Don't move. I can help." Through waves of pain, Julian watched as Nyara placed her hands gently on his injured arm. Her eyes closed in concentration, and a warmth unlike anything he'd experienced began spreading from her touch. "What are you?" he started to ask, but his words dissolved into a gasp as the sensation intensified. "We can redirect energy," she explained, her voice strained with effort, including pain. "I'm establishing a temporary empathic channel to accelerate your healing." The world around Julian began to shimmer, colors becoming more vivid, sounds more distinct. He could feel the steady rhythm of Nyara's heartbeat, not against his skin but within his mind, as if it were another consciousness taking up residence alongside his own. "I feel you," he whispered in amazement, "not just physically. I can sense your essence." Nyara's eyes opened, the silver flecks now dominating the color. "The bond works both ways. It's how our healers connect with those they help." Her voice in his mind was even more musical than in his ears. "It will fade as you heal, but for now, we are connected." Hours later, back at the research station, Julian sat on the examination table as the human medical officer confirmed what he already knew. His bones were knitting together at an accelerated rate, and the wound on his shoulder was closing cleanly. "Whatever they did, it worked," the doctor muttered, "though I'd like to understand the mechanism better." Julian merely nodded, distracted by the new awareness that hummed beneath his skin. Though Nyara had returned to her quarters to rest after the healing, he could still sense her, a gentle presence at the edges of his consciousness, like the memory of music long after the song has ended. That night, he found himself standing outside her door without conscious decision to go there. "Come in," she called before he could knock. Of course she would sense his approach. Nyara sat cross-legged on a floor covered in soft, moss-like growth that responded to pressure by giving off a subtle glow. Around her, specimens they had collected throughout their research floated in containment fields, gently rotating. "You should be resting," she said, though her expression was warm. "I couldn't," Julian admitted, sitting across from her. "This connection between us, I've never experienced anything like it." Nyara nodded. "The empathic bond normally fades quickly with non-Lumarians, but ours appears to be persisting." A hint of uncertainty crossed her features. "Does it disturb you?" Julian considered the question carefully. "No," he finally said. "It feels right somehow. As if a sense I never knew I was missing has suddenly awakened." He reached for her hand, and as their fingers intertwined, the empathic bond flared between them. A sudden surge of emotions that left them both breathless. Julian could feel Nyara's fascination with him, her growing affection, and beneath it all a longing that mirrored his own. "This is unusual," she whispered, voice trembling slightly. "Normally the bond is one-directional, healer to patient. This is becoming something more." Julian gently drew her closer until their foreheads touched, a Lumarian gesture of intimacy she had once explained to him. Through their connection, he felt her surprise give way to pleasure at his understanding of her customs. "I'm beginning to think," he said softly, "that my research here will yield discoveries I never anticipated in my proposal." Nyara's laugh was like sunshine in his mind.
"Science often leads us down unexpected paths. When their lips met this time—"
The kiss deepened with the knowledge flowing between them, each sensing exactly what the other felt, creating a feedback loop of pleasure and discovery that transcended physical sensation. Julian cupped her face with gentle hands, marveling at the softness of her skin beneath his fingertips, while through their bond he felt her wonder at the novelty of his human features. "Stay," Nyara whispered against his lips, both a spoken invitation and an emotional plea that resonated through their connection. As the twin moons of Lumaria rose outside, casting bands of silver light through the window, Julian and Nyara explored their newfound connection, physically and emotionally intertwined, learning the contours of two different species united by a bond that science could measure, but never fully explain. Later, as Nyara slept beside him, her violet skin luminous in the moonlight, Julian gazed at the ceiling where the empathic plants reflected their shared emotions in pulsing patterns of light. He was a scientist, trained to observe and record with detachment. But some discoveries he now understood, could only be made by becoming part of the very phenomenon one sought to understand. Worlds apart, the research expedition's scheduled departure date approached with the inexorable certainty of a mathematical equation. 2 weeks remained, then one, then mere days. Each passing moment a reminder of the looming separation that neither Julian nor Niara wished to acknowledge. "Your findings are remarkable, Dr. Eliza Chen," the expedition leader told Julian as they reviewed his data. "The adaptive properties of Lumarian flora could revolutionize agricultural methods on resource-depleted colonies." She studied his face with the shrewd assessment of someone who had led dozens of interplanetary missions. "The science division will want to send a specialized team for extended study." "I should be part of that team," Julian said immediately, trying to keep the desperation from his voice. "I've established research protocols, built relationship with local scientists, particularly one scientist from what I've observed," Chen interrupted, her expression softening slightly. "Julian, I've seen this before. Xenoanthropologists have a term for it, the first contact syndrome. It's natural to form attachments during pioneering work with new species." Julian felt a flare of indignation. "This isn't some psychological phenomenon to be categorized and dismissed." "Perhaps not," Chen acknowledged. "But Earth regulations are clear. Initial expeditions return complete. Assessment periods follow. New teams are formed based on objective criteria." Her voice gentled. "The best you can hope for is reassignment in 8 to 10 months. That night, Julian and Niara sat on the edge of a crystalline cliff overlooking the valley where they had first met. Through their persistent empathic bond, each could feel the other's turmoil, emotions too complex for either of their languages to fully articulate. 8 months, Niara said finally, breaking the silence. Her voice was steady, but Julian could feel the current of sorrow beneath her words. "In the span of a Lumarian lifetime, that's barely a moment. And yet," Julian replied, taking her hand, "it feels like an eternity." The twin moons cast their glow over Niara's violet skin, highlighting the delicate patterns that Julian had come to know intimately. Through their bond, he sensed her struggling with something, a decision or revelation she was hesitant to share. "What is it?" he asked gently. Niara turned to face him fully, silver-flecked eyes luminous in the moonlight. "There is a possibility." Her voice was careful, measured. "Our elders possess the ability to create permanent empathic bonds, connections that span distances even between stars." Julian's heart quickened. "You mean we could maintain this connection even when I return to Earth?" "Theoretically." Niara's hesitation colored their bond with uncertainty. "But such bonds are traditionally formed between Lumarians who have committed to a lifelong partnership. The process is significant, sacred." The weight of her words settled between them. Through their connection, Julian felt the unspoken question. Was what they shared strong enough to justify such a permanent entwinement of spirits? "What would it mean?" he asked finally. "For both of us?" Niara's gaze was unwavering. "We would carry part of each other always. Distance would not break our connection, but—" She paused, and Julian felt her concern wash through their bond. "The human nervous system is different from ours. There is no precedent for how it might affect you long-term." Julian reached out, cradling her face with gentle hands. "So there are risks." "Yes," she admitted. "And something else you should know." Her emotional signature in their bond shifted, taking on a tone Julian had come to recognize as her scientific objectivity asserting itself. "The Lumarian Council has expressed interest in you, specifically your unusual receptivity to our empathic abilities. They've suggested that instead of you returning to Earth, I might accompany you as a cultural ambassador." Julian blinked in surprise. "You would leave Lumaria? Your work, your people? To explore new worlds?" A smile touched her lips, though Julian could feel her underlying apprehension. "Isn't that what brought you here in the first place?" Later that night, as they lay intertwined in Julian's quarters, the reality of their situation crystallized between them. Either path, permanent bonding or Niara leaving her homeworld, represented profound change and uncertainty. Through their connection, each could sense the other's fears alongside their hope. "We have 3 days," Julian whispered against her shoulder, his lips brushing her shimmering violet skin. "We don't have to decide tonight." Niara turned in his arms, her eyes seeking his in the dim light. What does your heart tell you? Julian closed his eyes, focusing on the empathic bond between them, that impossible, wonderful connection that science couldn't fully explain. Within it, he felt not just Nyara's presence, but a glimpse of what their future might hold. Bright with possibility, yet shadowed with the unknown. That some discoveries, he said finally, opening his eyes to meet her gaze, are worth any risk. As dawn approached, bathing Lumaria in the golden light of its distant sun, Julian and Nyara made love with the bittersweet intensity of those facing both possibility and separation. Their empathic bond magnified every sensation, creating echoes of pleasure that resonated between them. In those hours, the question of different species seemed meaningless. They were simply two beings who had found in each other something rare and precious, something neither was willing to relinquish without a fight. Cosmic convergence. The final day arrived with a spectacular aurora that painted Lumaria's sky in sheets of blue and violet. The expedition team bustled with the controlled chaos of departure, equipment being packed, samples catalogued, final reports transmitted to Earth. Amid it all, Julian worked with focused intensity in the research lab, surrounded by data projections and biological samples. "You've been at this for 18 hours straight," Dr. Chen observed as she entered, concern evident in her voice. "The transport leaves in 4 hours, Julian." He barely looked up from the complex molecular model rotating before him. "I know." Chen approached cautiously, studying the display. "What exactly are you trying to prove here?" Julian gestured to the simulation, where Lumarian plant cells interacted with a modified human neurotransmitter compound. "The empathic abilities of Lumarians aren't magical, they're biological, based on specialized cellular structures that process emotional energy as information." His eyes were bright with the fervor of scientific breakthrough. "I believe I've identified the mechanism that allows for their long-distance empathic bonds." Chen frowned. "And why is this suddenly so urgent?" "Because," came Nyara's voice from the doorway, "we're trying to determine if a human nervous system can sustain such a bond without harm." She entered, carrying a data crystal that pulsed with stored information. "The Council has granted access to our medical archives." Understanding dawned on Chen's face. "You two aren't just saying goodbye, are you?" Julian met her gaze steadily. "I'm coming back with the team as scheduled. But Nyara and I—" He glanced at the Lumarian woman, feeling her encouragement flow through their bond. "We're exploring options." Hours later, as the human expedition made final preparations for departure, Julian and Nyara stood before the Lumarian elders in the sacred grove, a cathedral of ancient trees whose consciousness stretched back millennia. The eldest among them, a Lumarian with deep indigo skin etched with silver markings of great age, studied the unusual couple with eyes that seemed to contain galaxies. "We have reviewed your research," the elder said, her voice like rustling leaves, "and we have communed with the ancient ones." She gestured to the towering trees around them. "What you propose has never been attempted between our species." Julian stepped forward, respectfully inclining his head. "With all due respect, Elder, many things between our species were unprecedented until this expedition." A ripple of amusement passed through the gathered council. The Elder's expression remained serene, but Julian sensed her approval through the ambient empathic field that surrounded all Lumarians. "Your scientific understanding is impressive for one not born to our world," she acknowledged. "Combined with Nyara's expertise, you have indeed identified a pathway that might allow a sustainable bond." Her gaze intensified. "But science alone is insufficient for what you seek. The bonding requires absolute certainty, a commitment of spirit that transcends physical separation." Nyara moved to stand beside Julian, her shoulder brushing his in a gesture of solidarity. "We understand the gravity of what we ask." The elder nodded slowly. "Then we will proceed. But know this. Once formed, such bonds can be dormant but never truly broken." What followed was unlike anything Julian had experienced in all his years of scientific exploration. The elders guided them to the heart of the grove, where the massive roots of the ancient trees formed a natural chamber. There, surrounded by bioluminescent flora that pulsed in time with the collective heartbeat of the gathered Lumarians, Julian and Nyara knelt facing each other. The ceremony blended ritual and science in a way that Julian found profoundly moving. As the elders chanted in their melodic language, Nyara prepared a solution derived from the essence of Lumaria's most empathically potent plants, modified according to their research to be compatible with human biology. This will anchor the bond on a cellular level, she explained softly. But the true connection comes from intent. When they each drank from the ceremonial vessel, the effect was immediate and overwhelming. Julian felt as though his consciousness had expanded beyond his physical form, encompassing not just Nyara but the entire living network of Lumaria, plants, animals, the very soil beneath them, all connected in a vast sentient web of life. Gradually the expansion receded until only the bond with Nyara remained, but transformed, strengthened, deepened beyond what they had shared before. He could sense not just her immediate emotions, but the very essence of her being, as familiar to him now as his own thoughts, yet wonderfully, beautifully other. "It is done," the elder announced, satisfaction in her ancient voice. "You carry each other now across whatever distance may separate you." 3 hours later, Julian stood at the boarding ramp of the Earth vessel, his expedition colleagues already aboard. Nyara stood before him, resplendent in traditional Lumarian attire that highlighted the luminous quality of her violet skin. 6 months, he said, holding both her hands in his. "That's how long it will take for my application to the cultural exchange program to be processed and approved." Nyara smiled, and through their newly strengthened bond, Julian felt her absolute faith in their future. "I will use that time to prepare for my journey to Earth. The Council has appointed me official ambassador, the first Lumarian to visit your world." Julian leaned forward, pressing his forehead to hers in the Lumarian gesture of deepest intimacy. Through their bond flowed all the words that remained unspoken, promises, hopes, the certainty of reunion. "Partings are unnecessary between those who are never truly separated," Nyara whispered, echoing an ancient Lumarian proverb. As the Earthship rose through Lumaria's atmosphere, Julian sat at a viewport, watching the beautiful world recede below. Most of his colleagues assumed his unusual silence was the natural melancholy of departure. Only Dr. Chen, who had witnessed the culmination of his research, understood the truth. "How does it feel?" she asked quietly, taking the seat beside him. Julian closed his eyes, focusing on the bond that stretched between him and the planet below. A connection that, according to both Lumarian tradition and their scientific breakthrough, would remain intact regardless of the light years soon to separate them. "Like discovering that space itself is not the vast emptiness we've always believed," he answered, a smile touching his lips, "but rather a medium through which consciousness can travel, faster than light, stronger than distance." Chen studied him with scientific curiosity. "And you're certain the bond will hold across interstellar space?" Julian opened his eyes, gazing out at the stars that would guide his eventual return to Lumaria, or perhaps guide Nyara to Earth, whichever came first. Within his mind, heart, and now every cell of his being, he could feel Nyara's presence, a constant reminder that love, like science, could transcend the boundaries of world, species, and even space itself. "Some connections," he said simply, "exist beyond the constraints of conventional physics." As the ship engaged its faster-than-light drive, carrying him toward Earth at speeds that defied imagination, Julian felt Nyara's consciousness move alongside his own. Separate yet forever connected, two explorers who had ventured into the uncharted territory of interspecies love and discovered that the heart, like the universe itself, held infinite possibilities for those brave enough to seek them.